Let's start with your name and where and when were you born?
My name is Maurice, or Maury, Bread. I use that as a
Your nickname.
that's my nickname.
Yeah.
Vander Veen. And I was born in Detroit, Michigan on March 20th, 1926.
Where did that nickname come from?
Well, my sister, incidentally, we were both adopted, but I still consider her as my sister, called me Brudder. And from that, I was known as Brud, B-R-O-D, all of my life. My teachers, the nuns that taught me, all my friends and my neighbors have always called me Brud. And in recent years, it's reverted a little bit to Maury, but for my sake, I prefer Brud.
What was your early schooling like?
I went to a elementary school, a Catholic school, St. Stephen's in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and went there for 8 years, and then went to Ottawa Hills High School, a public school in Grand Rapids.
Mm-hmm.
I graduated from Ottawa in 1944, and shortly before I graduated, I went down to the Marine Corps recruiting office and persuaded them to enlist me. At that time, they had a program where they would delay the enlistment until I graduated. So in theory, I enlisted in the Marine Corps before I graduated from high school. And then after graduation, they snapped me up.
So you were in school when Pearl Harbor happened.
Yes.
What was your reaction to that?
I can remember that day, not really vividly, but we'd gone to the movie that Sunday and come home to, at that time the Grand Rapids Press had an extra sheet that they put out, a green sheet, and they were selling extras and it was on the radio. And for my part, I'm not too sure I knew where Pearl Harbor was. And for the part of most of the people I knew, they didn't know where Pearl Harbor was, whether it was in England or Hawaii or in Asia. Right. But we soon found out.
At that moment, you were too young to get into the military.
Yes.
But did that have any effect on your desire to become in the Marines?
Shortly after that, it did. Since I had a cousin who enlisted in the Marine Corps and became a Marine officer, and when he came home on his initial leave, I thought he looked quite splendid in his green uniform. So that was the first time I was attracted to it.
Okay. Let me ask one of the stupidest questions you could ever ask a Marine. Why did you want to be a Marine?
That's hard to pin down, Frank. Because of my cousin, whose sister also enlisted in the Marine Corps, I had a neighbor up the street who was at Tarawa, and I just thought that the Marines at that time offered me a chance to see some of the world that I'd never see again, and do some of the things I would never ever hope to be able to do.
Now, 1944, the war is, I guess you would call, winding down, not over,
right,
but winding
exactly.
down. Was there any sense that you were going to get into battle, or you were going to be part of that effort? Are you going to miss it, or? Well,
frankly, when I was a senior in high school, at that time in June, of course, the invasion of Normandy took place, and we thought too that the war would end soon. And frankly, most of the guys that I was with were a little bit fearful that we wouldn't get into it, little knowing what lay ahead. But it's been so long ago, I don't remember how exactly I felt, but I do recall that I had every desire to get going and get into the service.
Which is a common thing amongst your generation. I mean, people realized that they had to go and do their part.
I think so, right.
What was the actual process of getting into the Marines? I mean, signing up, you signed up already, right? So you were already enlisted.
Right.
But where did you go and how did you get processed?
Do you mean before boot camp?
No, after you got out of school, after high school.
Okay.
What did you do right after high school?
Right after high school, I waited for my marching orders because they already had me enlisted.
Right.
And I graduated in June, and at the end of June, I was on my way to Parris Island, South Carolina.
Okay.
To the Marine Corps recruit depot.
You went by train?
Went by train.
Okay. Now, you're still in civilian clothes.
Still in civilian clothes.
Okay. You get off the train. What am I seeing?
You're seeing a very short, wiry Marine Corps corporal who was just the epitome of evil as far as I was concerned. He used language that even as a high school kid I wasn't used to. And it was a rude introduction, believe me. They took us in hand rather quickly and let us know that we were no longer civilians. However, we were not Marines either. We were the scum of the earth, and we were boots. That's what we were. And we would be until we graduated, if we graduated.
So you got this guy yelling at you, and they march you off to the barracks, or where did you go?
You could call it marching. We had our little kits with us and dragging our rear ends and our gear, and we went to, first they fed us. Again, if you can call it being fed, I can't. It was probably the Marine Corps Delight Sunday cold cuts and lemonade, something like that. That was the first thing. They fed us, and they marched us around a little bit, tried to put us in a barracks. We were completely disheveled, and they, I'm sure, called us out 2 or 3 times the first night and tried to square us away. And the next day was involved in starting to get your gear, get your uniform, and starting to make some semblance of a platoon so that we could march with the beat.
Approximately how many people were in one barracks?
I'm a little bit hazy on that, but sure. I think that our platoon, which was probably about 80, had the entire barracks.
Okay. You talking about bunk bed type thing?
Yes, right.
Okay, right. All right. You had the lower or the upper?
Too high, right. Too high sacks. Right. And then that was the squad room, the squad bay, and the DIs, or at least 2 of them, had their own room down here.
What's a DI?
A DI is the drill instructor. Okay. He is the God Almighty to the boot.
Right.
And what he says, you do.
Right.
Without question.
So then, you were talking about issuing your uniforms. They had a tailor from New York there to make sure that you had your length right and all
Absolutely,
that?
Absolutely, right. They threw them at you. They looked at you, and that's how they measured you. And some of the pants were short and some were long, and if you were lucky, you got clothes that fit rather good. The only thing that they did pay attention to eventually were the shoe sizes, because we were going to be using those shoes 24 hours a day, it seemed like, on the drill field, on the grinder.
Yeah. The daily routine from the very beginning. I don't mean later when you got into more training and stuff like that, but what was the daily routine like?
Well, you have to realize that I was there in the summer of 1944, and the war in the Pacific, although the end was in sight at the end of the tunnel, was still rather ferocious, and they were grinding us through there as quickly as they could. And I think that we were in boot camp for not more than 10 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. So it was a stepped up program, and we worked from 4:30 in the morning until as long as they wanted to keep us out. They fell us out. Again, they fed us, marched us back. I'm pulling all this out of my head.
I fully understand. Yep.
We squared away the squad bay and stood inspection, and then the day proceeded with close order drill, marching, learning how to put one foot in front of the other, and whenever they didn't have anything to do, we did close order drill, and that may seem like something that wasn't necessary, but it helped to install discipline, and that's the main reason that we had classes. We had grenade classes, bayonet practice, swimming, and then at the end, just before we graduated, about maybe 3 or 4 weeks before we graduated, we went to the rifle range. And that consisted of snapping and learning what the weapon was. We were issued M1 rifles, and then we shot for record. And if you shot expert, you were deemed to be a king. Expert, sharpshooter, and marksman. And if you didn't qualify, I don't know what happened, because everybody in our platoon qualified. At least they became marksmen.
I was just going to ask you that. I mean, were there people that dropped out that didn't make it?
Yes, but not because of that. We had, I think, two people that didn't make it. One of them, strangely enough, had been in the Marine Corps before and was given a discharge of some sort, came back in, and just was not fit for the military life. And he was in his sack one night, and the next morning he was gone. Never saw him again. And then there was another one that had a problem, a mental problem of some sort. But other than that, they stuck there.
Now, this is really hard training.
Yes, it is.
Physically,
absolutely,
mentally.
Right.
Was there any point where you're going, I can't do this?
Personally, no. I rather enjoyed it. It kept in shape. Played a little football and things like that, and it bothered me to the point where I was under constant supervision and harassment. But physically, I was able to withstand it. And there weren't too many of the kids that came from all over the country that couldn't take it.
This is where you really build that pride in being a Marine. Is that accurate? Is this where it really started? Where you really started to get it?
That's where it starts.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was pushed into us and pounded into us that we were going to become Marines, the finest fighting force in the world, and don't ever forget it. And we never did forget it. At least I didn't. Semper Fidelis. And that's just their attitude. And they think, in fact, they don't think, they know that they're the finest fighting force in the world. And they make you believe that, too.
Yeah. Well, Sefton would disagree, because obviously the paratroopers are the finest ones.
Absolutely. I've come to realize that there are other people in the world beside the United States Marine Corps. And I'm sure Sefton realizes that, too. That the 101st Airborne is a great outfit, but they're not alone.
I can't wait till he sees this. You get through basic training. There's got to be a graduation ceremony of some kind.
Yeah, hazy. They weren't putting too much emphasis on ceremonial procedures at that time, but we did graduate. We graduated, I believe, on a Saturday. The whole battalion, that is a group of several platoons, graduated at the same time, marched in front of the commanding general, and then were dispersed. And before that, we had been given a battery of tests as to, do you want to be part of the air wing? Do you want to be a communications man? Do you want to be, at that time they had Marines aboard the major naval ships. Mm-hmm. And do you want to be a seagoing Marine, or do you want to be an infantry Marine? And I think 99% of us wanted to be infantry. Whether we did or not, that's where we ended up at Camp Lejeune.
Wow.
Advanced infantry training.
Were your parents present at the graduation ceremony?
No.
Okay. What was their reaction to your getting? There must have been a certain amount of pride that there's some.
I'm sure there was. My father, who had never been in the service, was certainly extremely proud of it, and my mother was too. They had no inkling at that time of what it took to be in the military and what was going to happen to their son and to a lot of other sons.
Sure. But
I'm sure they were proud of it.
Did you have any idea where you were going after graduation?
Well, we knew as soon as they said Camp Lejeune, we knew we were going to go into the Fleet Marine Force, which is the infantry. And from there, no, we didn't know.
Okay. So you arrive at Lejeune?
Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Right.
Okay. Was it similar to where you had just come from? It was barracks and big area?
It was much bigger. Okay. And it was more of a relaxed attitude. We were now Marines, although we were lowly privates. We weren't boots anymore. And it took a while to forget to refer to sergeants as sir, which you did. You sirred everybody at Parris Island, whether they were PFCs or sergeant majors. But it was a more relaxed attitude, and the training was a little bit more advanced too. We did a lot of under fire training and
under fire meaning real bullets?
Yeah, they had fixed position for 30 caliber machine guns that you had to crawl under the wire, and if you didn't stay down, you would get hit. I never saw anybody get hit. There were some real safety provisions that they installed so that they were sure that they didn't lose them in training. Although there were accidents, I'm sure I didn't see any of them though.
Was this training as rigorous as what you went through, but maybe less the kind of yelling and screaming at you kind of thing, but just as rigorous?
I think you've hit it exactly. It was rigorous, but there was more emphasis on make sure that you know that, and don't yell at that guy until he is bleeding at the ears because you're a corporal and he's a private. But it was still hard training because that was the last step before we got aboard cattle cars and went to the West Coast to be sent to the Pacific.
Was there a camaraderie amongst your group? Were you all from boot camp to the new camp, or was it just different people? And
no, when we left Parris Island, the platoon, for all intents and purposes, was pretty well split up.
Okay.
Although I'm sure the majority of us went to Camp Lejeune. Right after Parris Island, you start losing track of all but a few of your friends who go with you. And there were two men that I had been in the recruit platoon with that served with me at Camp Lejeune, at Camp Pendleton in the Pacific, and went all the way to North China with me. So,
wow. Okay.
But I've lost track of them since then.
So where did you go next then? You said you got up cattle cars. Okay.
Got aboard the cattle car, about 100 of us to a car, it seemed like, and they took us to Camp Pendleton, California. Mm-hmm. And that took about, I can't recall, but it took the better part of a week to go across country. We'd stop every once in a while, and people would pile out and exercise, and the town folk would come and watch us, and we'd get back and go further west, and we ended up at, as you know, at Oceanside, just above San Diego.
I was just there.
Yeah, right.
Visiting my mom.
It's beautiful country if you don't have to climb the hills every day.
Yeah, I've gone past Pendleton many times.
I'm sure you have.
I've actually been on the base.
Yeah.
Did you have any? You mentioned earlier that you really didn't know where you were going. You had some suspicions. By this time, did they tell you where you were going?
No, they didn't have to, because we were on the West Coast, and all of the Marine Corps action in World War II, aside from some individuals, was taking place in the Pacific area. So we were pointed in that general direction.
Did you know how bad the losses, that the casualties were? Was that made any evidence to you that the kind of island hopping that the Marines were taking on and the kind of casualties involved?
I don't think there was a lot of emphasis put on it. We had newspapers on the base, and we knew that what was happening, but they didn't make a big issue of it because they knew that it wouldn't be too long before we'd be out there and either counted as one of the casualties or one of the survivors. So I think they didn't want us to dwell on it too much.
Was there any, I realize this is reaching back a long time and it's a difficult question, but was there any apprehension? Or you're a young man, you're fit, you're a Marine. I know that sometimes you don't look at it as, I'm going to go off and potentially be killed or something like that. Was there any of that?
I can't recall that there was much of it, Frank. Again, you're talking about, for the most part, 17 and 18-year-old kids. And I think it was more of a sense of adventure than anything else. We knew that there were dangerous days ahead, but like most people in that age bracket, you're going to live forever, and it's going to be the next guy, not you, that's going to get it.
So you're in California, you're continuing training. Where did you go from there?
One morning they put us aboard cattle cars, and we went down the highway to San Diego and climbed aboard an Army transport, the General O.H. Ernst. A bucket, believe me. And we sat aboard the General Ernst for a few hours, and then we put out to sea in the early evening on a Sunday, headed for parts unknown.
Have you ever been on a boat before?
No. just on the SS Ramona that goes around Reed's Lake.
What was your physical reaction, and what was the physical reaction of the guys around you?
Violent illness, really. We started hitting those long ground swells coming out of San Diego, and they had just fed us a meal of pork chops and rancid butter, and it wasn't long before everybody was hanging over the side, and that's like an epidemic. Everybody gets sick. Although I'm not being a braggart, I don't think I got sick, but a lot of people did. And there were probably 3,500 guys aboard the ship. We were stacked 5 high, about 5 decks below, and it was a continuous standing in line for chow, and just utter boredom. Although at the time I didn't realize it, and I'm sure a lot of the guys didn't, that there were still Japanese subs that were active in the South Pacific, all the way towards Honolulu. So, and we were not a convoy; we were single. So
you arrive in Honolulu. You get a chance to get off.
Stay at Honolulu. We didn't stop. No, we didn't stop there. We kept on going, and we were aboard ship for about almost a month, and we ended up in the Russell Islands, which is a part of the Solomon Islands group. We went through the Slot, Savo Island, and Guadalcanal, and then landed at a place. I was in the 32nd replacement draft, and we went to a little island called Banika, Banika, and Banika was about 4 miles from Pavuvu, which was the rehabilitation base for the 1st Marine Division. And when they needed a replacement, they would go to Banika and pick us out.
What do you mean by rehabilitation base? Well,
the 1st Division had just returned from Peleliu, and they had taken horrendous casualties. They had about 5,000 or 6,000 killed, and they were refitting and getting ready for their next invasion, which would include me and the guys that came with me in the 32nd replacement draft, or most of them anyway. I stayed in Banika for maybe 4 weeks or so, and then was transferred to the division.
Now, Banika, what were your accommodations like there? This is an island, right? This is just
Banika is an island, and it was they'd had Banika for some time, probably 1942, right after the invasion of Guadalcanal.
Okay.
Huts with tents with wooden decks, and probably 10 or 12 to a hut, plus the rats. The rats were
lots of rats.
Oh boy, lots of rats. Rats and sand and land crabs.
Hot?
Yes, it was. We were there we got there in December of '44, and it was hot and muggy, just tremendous.
For people who've never been to Asia or that part of the world, of course, as you know, I grew up there.
Yeah.
The rats were, you're talking the size of little dogs.
They're unbelievable.
Just huge things.
And yet the land crabs were there were so many of them. They actually chased the rats up into the trees. The rats were living in the trees. So it gives you an idea of what kind of land crabs we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because those rats were big.
They were very big. So basically you're there waiting for 4 weeks.
Right.
To find out what they're going to do with it.
Not too much training except, physical drill underarms, marching around the island and things of that nature, and getting a series of shots. I can remember one day we got some shots for, we got 2 in each arm and 1 in each leg. And they marched us through the, I think this was the part of the mess area. They marched us up the stairs, they throw the needles into us, and they marched us down the stairs. And the guy in front of me, he didn't get down the stairs, he just keeled right over. But, it was for plague and things that
Cholera?
Cholera, right.
Cholera hurts.
Yeah.
That one really
it does.
hurts.
Yeah.
It swells up.
Yeah. A lot of people got sick.
Yeah. Because traveling as I did, I had to have them regularly. As a child, it really hurt.
Oh, I can imagine. Gosh.
Just especially the cholera one. That's the one that has the most vivid memory for me. During that 4 weeks, was there scuttlebutt going around about where you were going, or was there any official word where you're going, or are you just basically waiting to see what happens?
No official word. We knew that we were going into the 1st Marine Division eventually, okay. And we knew that they were gearing up for another program, an invasion. Right. But of course, we didn't know at the time where we were going. We spent a lot of our time at Vanica loading ammo aboard ships. So that was an indication that things were going to get hot very shortly.
So what happened next?
Well, I got transferred to the division, and myself and a young man named Jack Turney from Mississippi got transferred at the same time. They put us aboard a mail boat and sent us across to the division. And I was assigned to the, it was called at that time the 4th Joint Assault Signal Company, which was a combined air and artillery liaison between the infantry advance companies and the artillery and the naval gunfire. Naval gunfire and air and, not artillery, naval gunfire and air, I'm sorry.
When you arrived, what was the reaction of the people? How were you treated? As a place where you were treated?
Coolly, very coolly. They'd just come back from, as I said, Peleliu, and they'd lost a lot of their buddies, and we didn't, at the time, being green recruits with no combat, we didn't realize what they had just gone through, and they'd gone through hell, and they were going to accept us eventually, but we were led to understand that we were not yet part of the division until we proved ourselves. So.
What was kind of give me a lay of the land, if you would. You arrive there. There's soldiers, Marines all over the place. You're in pup tents. You're in barracks. What are you seeing?
You're looking at a company area with maybe a dozen or so squad tents and gravel-lined paths. Probably a basketball court that was put together with a coral and a mess area. And Pavuvu was really not an ideal place for training because there was no room. We would run a company problem, and we'd be running right into the next company who was holding a close order drill inspection. So to accommodate us in that respect, shortly before we left for Okinawa, they put us aboard ships, and we practiced landing off the coast of Guadalcanal. And that was really most of the training that we had.
It's some moments during these interviews, something strikes me. I was just thinking, you're doing this training in Guadalcanal, knowing what Guadalcanal was, massive Guadalcanal, what it took to get there, and you're just training now.
Exactly.
The guys that came before you. Where did you go from there then? Now you're actually going to get into combat? You know you're going to get into combat?
Right, and we did, yes. We knew. We left the Solomon Islands on March 15th and headed north, and the convoy rendezvoused at a little atoll called Ulithi. And when we got there, the rest of the invasion fleet was there, and it just stretched for miles.
Give us a visual of that. I know what you're talking about, but let's, for the record, what did you see? We're talking stretch for miles.
We woke up one morning and went topside, and all you could see were ships, battleships and cruisers and aircraft carriers. It was the largest invasion of the Pacific War. We didn't know it at the time. But then there was also one ship there that was already at anchor, and it was battered and stove in, and the flight deck was caved in. The metalwork on top was hanging over the side, and we were looking at the aircraft carrier Franklin that had been hit by a couple of 500-pound bombs off the coast of Japan. And we didn't know it at the time, but the Franklin, they had, I think, 700 men killed aboard the Franklin and about 1,100 injured. And they towed that, or they put her underway. She got underway and went all the way into New York, probably at about 10 knots.
Yeah.
And they did save it, but it was really something to see, and we knew then what we were in for.
I actually have talked to two men who survived that. They live right here in Grand Rapids.
The Franklin?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
and one that was on the Hale watching the battle happen.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
A difficult question to ask because I know I'm reaching way back into your memory banks, but I'm just picturing walking out on the deck there and just seeing this huge array of ships, and you're part of something huge.
You're right. It made you feel rather insignificant. There are a lot of people there, a lot of people, a lot of equipment, a lot of money.
What was your next? What happened next for you?
We stayed in that area for maybe 2 days, 3 days, and when the fleet was assembled, we headed again northward towards Okinawa. The Okinawan invasion took place on April 1st of 1945, which was also not only April Fool's Day, it was Easter Sunday. And when we came topside, we could hear the commotion anyway, but that entire fleet that we had seen at Ulithi was now engaged in a massive bombardment of the Okinawan coast, and it was just the noise alone.
So you're just seeing ship after ship just boom, 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 boom.
Right.
Just
the cruisers and the battle wagons and the aircraft, Naval and Marine Corps fighters and bombers. They were really giving it to them. And the coast of Okinawa, the landing area, you couldn't see it. It was just completely enveloped in smoke. And we thought then, there's nobody out there. I mean, they're dead. They've got to be dead. But as you know or may not know, fortunately for the 1st Marine Division, the Japanese had decided to take care of the southern end of the island rather than where we were. And they put all of their defenses down south into a real elaborate network of caves and mines, and it was really vicious. But the first couple of days we had no resistance at all.
So you're now fully equipped, right? You've got your gun, you've got your pack, all that. You get into landing craft, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Went over the side in a landing net, got into the landing craft, and we rendezvoused with several other landing craft. I don't know how many they do. And then when it was our time to go in, they assembled, and we went in to a point and got transferred to amphibious tractors to get over the reef, and made our landing aboard the tractors.
Was there any resistance?
Very, very little. I don't know of anyone in our unit that even got scratched. I think that the 1st Marine Division that day had maybe 20 killed in action, nothing at all. And coincidentally, the 2nd Marine Division were making a feinting surprise maneuver down on the other end to draw the Japanese away from there. And then they turned around and came back, and they suffered a lot of casualties. But the 1st didn't see too much the first couple of days until we got up in the northern part of the island.
This is jungle terrain?
It's mixed. It's farm terrain, it's terraced, and forest and jungles. And the main feature that I can recall were the huge burial monuments that they had. They had it shaped almost like a harp or something like that, and they could have used those for fortifications, but in that part of the island they didn't do it. They left them alone. But the other feature that, as you well know, being from that part of the world or having traveled there, is the god-awful stench that you could smell Okinawa before you could see it. And it was just, and then after we got down south and started to really get hit, the filth and the odor was just unbelievable. The flies, and it was like fighting in a garbage pit. It really was.
Yeah. And the heat is still there,
and the heat was
humidity is still there.
It started to rain in I can't recall, but in early May, I guess, and it just continued and continued and continued. The whole island was just a swamp, Even our landing craft got bogged down, or the amphibious tractors that they were using. Our clothes rotted, our shoes rotted. You couldn't keep your equipment clean or your weapons. And then you had this god-awful cluster of flies that just hovered over you while you were eating.
Yeah.
And you had to imagine where that fly had been before he landed on your piece of moldy bread. And it wasn't very appetizing.
Yeah. I certainly don't mean to compare my experience with yours, but I experienced that during Boy Scouts.
Sure.
Right. We didn't have anybody shooting at us, but we had the flies. We did definitely have the flies.
They stick right to the food.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You were talking about the clothes rotting and the boots and all that. Were you resupplied? I mean, how did you get changed?
Well, we were, but we spent a lot of time, weeks at a time, in the same clothes. You weren't able to take a bath. You weren't able to change even your underwear, your skivvies, or your socks. But eventually, we got supplies. Mm-hmm. But that was secondary to the ammunition and the food. Yeah. So,
well, let's talk about the first encounter. Then, the first time you actually saw battle.
We relieved the 27th Infantry on the line, and they had encountered just fierce resistance. And they were putting us into the line while they were withdrawing, which was a very difficult maneuver. And we came under real heavy artillery fire. And that's the first time I'd heard an incoming round that I thought was pointed at me. And I dove into a shell hole and face first into the mud, and I lifted my head up a little bit, and right next to me there was an American hand that was severed right at the wrist with a high school class ring on it. I'll never forget that. And from then on, it was every day and every night. The Japanese, like a lot of the Orientals, prefer to fight at night. And we got hit that night and the night after that and every night after that. They came at us the first time was about the second day we were on the line. They had gotten together about 50 or 60 Okinawan civilians, babies and old men and women, and they put them in front. And moved up into our defensive area. And of course, we didn't know what we were shooting at. But when we woke up in the morning, we found out that we had slaughtered a lot of innocent civilians, and not our fault, the Japanese fault, because they used them as a bait for us.
Sometimes it's hard for people to realize the kind of enemy we were up against. You know, in today's world, with television making it almost unreal, incidents like that sound, completely out of this world, and yet at the same time, this is the enemy that we were fighting.
Exactly. Yeah, they were that way, and it holds true. I'm not picking on the Japanese, but history shows that before we met them in Okinawa, they were doing the same thing in China back in the 30s, massacring and raping civilians, and that was not as much of a important thing to the Japanese culture. I mean, they're just different people. That's all.
The night fighting. When did you get a chance to sleep?
Well, very fitfully, we were usually, if we weren't pushing, that is, in the attack mode, we dig a hole, a fighting hole, and you and your buddy would climb in there, and unless something real drastic was happening, you'd go on 50% watch. You'd sleep for 2 hours, and he'd watch, or you hoped he'd watch, and then he'd wake you up, and vice versa.
Was there any sense of who was around you, or are you basically your whole attention and your whole world, so to speak, is this hole in the ground with this other guy?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We had no, unlike a lot of armies, we weren't privy to any information as to tactics or where we were going or why we were going there. And as you say, it was your own little world, and you just kept slogging forward.
Would there be a time of, either the one of your superior officers, if you will, running by, okay, guys, get ready, we're going here? How did that work on a daily basis? How did you communicate?
Well, as I recall, sometimes the previous night, we knew that we would be we were going to jump off in the attack, and that the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines was going to be on the point, and we were going to be taking the brunt of it. And they would tell us, very briefly, our objective was 600, 700, 1,000 meters to the front, and that's what many times we never made it. So we would withdraw and do it again the next day.
What was the terrain like during that period? Is that forest, jungle kind of thing?
No, it was so beaten and battered that I can't recall that there was much forest, but it was primarily crags and gullies and draws, just ideally suited for defensive fortifications. And you'd climb one hill and there'd be another one ahead of you. And you'd climb that and there'd be another one ahead of you again. And it just kept on going until we finally reached the southern end of the island.
That's, I guess, let's get there. There was a sense of finality at some point that here we are?
Well, really, there wasn't a sense of finality for the Marine Corps, because when we got to our final objective, and we knew that the island had been secured, they turned us around, and we were told they were going to go back up north. But in the meantime, we were going to police the island on the way up and pick up all your brass boys. We didn't do much of that, but they just put it back up in the northern end of the island, and we set a camp up there. And in the meantime, they dropped the 2 bombs, which we are forever grateful for, and I'm still grateful for, because I still firmly believe that if they hadn't done it, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today, and you may not be here either.
Yeah. So, yeah. It's very true. When you set up the camp there, you heard the news somehow. Was it by radio? How do you find out?
I probably by radio, and by the very fact that the fleet out in the bay were shooting off all their ammo, and it was a real fireworks display. And they put out the word that the war had ended. And for those of the guys in the division that had been overseas for a couple of years, that meant they were going home. For the men like myself that had just joined the division, we knew that we weren't going home. We didn't know where we were going. We thought probably we were going to Japan, but we didn't. We went to North China, to the area of Tientsin and Peiping.
What was the reaction? You said that the guns were being shot off from the ships. What about you guys? What was the reaction to you guys?
Well, kind of a stunned silence, really. I don't recall a great deal of celebration. People were shaking each other's hands, congratulating each other that we made it through. But I think it was more a sense of apprehension that this may be another one of their tricks, or it really wasn't over until it's over.
So where did you go from there?
Just about that time, there was a tremendous typhoon that hit the island and just battered us and battered the fleet. They lost a lot of ships. They put us aboard a attack transport, and the 1st Marine Division, which was part of the 3rd Amphibious Force, went to North China to rehabilitate, to restore the Chinese rule up there, and to send the Japanese soldiers home.
Yeah.
Some of those guys had been in North China for 10 years. They had their families there and their children. We had to disarm them, accept their surrender, and then send them back to Japan.
I want to get to that in a little more detail. Where were you when the typhoon hit?
We were still in the camp in the 1st Division base.
So you actually went through the actual typhoon?
Yeah, it blew all our tents down, and it was. It's hazy, but all I can recall is that it was just a fantastic, tremendous storm, and that the ships in the harbor were suffering more than we were. They had tried to get out to sea, but a lot of them didn't make it. So,
because I've lived through a number of those.
Have you?
There's a typhoon season. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
It's a very scary experience.
Yeah, it is.
Let's talk about your arrival in China. You're on a ship.
Right.
Okay. You're with the same group that you were in the...
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
I was with the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines.
Okay. You arrived in a harbor?
Went into Taku Harbor, which is, probably, again, I'm guessing, but it may be 10 or 15 miles from the city of Tenzin.
Okay.
And they put us aboard a lighter, and we went into the docks there. And we were the first Allied troops in North China since the beginning of the war. We were met as concrete heroes. I mean, they just couldn't do enough for us. And
see, I've seen the reaction of Chinese to the Flying Tigers, so I can get a real good. And yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Unfortunately, that feeling really didn't last too long. We were getting steak dinners for 10 and 15 cents, but within a month or so, that steak dinner cost you about $5 or $6. But it was to me, that was probably some of the best duty I've had in the Marine Corps.
Wow.
I spent a year in North China and got to know the people and got to understand what China really was. When you're an American and sitting back in North America, you visualize what it's like, people running around with funny clothes on and pedicabs and rickshaws, things of that nature. And to a certain extent, that was true even then, but it's far different from that today, I understand.
Actually, when I was born in Taipei, we still had pedicabs. You still had, the outdoor sewers. And
right, yeah.
All that kind of stuff. Well, you had already had the stench of Okinawa. How was the stench of North China?
It was comparable, although I think it was a little more under control. They have the, what do they call them? The
Benjos? Honey buckets.
Honey buckets,
yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a pole, which is carried on the back, and 2 buckets that have
then you take it out and dump it in the field.
That's right. You dump it. That was the fertilizer.
Right. And then you'd eat the onions the next day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was quite an experience.
Oh, my gosh. So what were your duties there? I mean, what was the daily routine like?
It was hectic. It was primarily, they called it guard duty, but you've got to understand that here are 10 or 12,000 guys that are just come from the South Pacific and Okinawa and the mud and the slime and the horror of that, and then we're thrust into what we thought was the epitome of civilization. And so we probably went a little wild, but basically we stood guard duty. And what we were guarding, I have no idea. We may have been, well, I can't say that. We were guarding a coal mound once in Tenzin, and our job, we had a .30 caliber machine gun post up there, was to keep the local citizenry, primarily the kids, from stealing the coal. Mm-hmm. And if we caught them stealing the coal, we'd send them down to the local police station. Well, the first time we did that, we caught a couple of little kids with their bag of coal, and we turned them over to the cops. And that's the last time we did that, because they took the first kid in, and they put his hands on a table and broke both his hands. So we grabbed the other one and got out of there and never did that again. But again, it's a different culture, and that's their punishment. We spent a week or so out in the Bay of Chihili aboard a transport. I don't know what it was, a Russian or Chinese transport with a load of saccharin. And they were having trouble with river pirates at the time. And we were to ward off any pirates that came aboard, kind of like Terry and the Pirates. Well, we did that for about 2 weeks. Can't recall ever seeing any pirates, but pretty good duty.
Where were you staying? What were your accommodations?
The first one we stayed in were Spanish Marine barracks. And they were a brick building, a compound, quite modern, although the sanitary facilities were not up to our par, and they had no. We had to use our own sleeping bags. We had no cots or anything. We slept. We stayed in a Japanese schoolhouse once, Spanish Marine barracks, and then at the end, before I got sent back home, I got transferred to the artillery regiment, the 11th Marines. And they were in the what was called the French Arsenal, which was a a big compound with barracks facilities and eating facilities and things of that nature, just outside the city.
You had mentioned earlier about disarming the Japanese. Talk about that.
Well, they had, I don't know how many thousands of soldiers they had in that area, but they basically, they came up and there were a line of tables here, and they dropped their weapons on the table and moved out.
Wow.
We had one incident that took place in Tenzin that we were standing guard duty, strangely enough, with 2 Japanese soldiers. And one of the kids I was with, I can't even remember his name, had been drinking that day, and he got a little boisterous. We had a plate of cookies on the table, and one of the Japanese soldiers helped himself to one of the cookies. Well, my compatriot took his M1 and shot him in the belly and killed him. And I was witness to a general court-martial for that young man, and he spent several years at Portsmouth Naval Prison for something that if he had done it a month before that, he probably would have gotten a medal for. So things like that stand out in your mind, but the everyday drabness, dreariness, you don't remember that. And it was drab and dreary.
You had mentioned about the price of a steak and all that, but generally, what was the response of the Chinese to you?
The Chinese to us?
Yeah.
Generally, they were very friendly and very accommodating, and thought of us as liberators and as partners and comrades in arms. That attitude obviously changed over the years, but in fact, the Chinese communists were at that time making a move towards the north, and our time was limited. We were on our way out.
Did you have any indication of what was going on in China? And I mean, you know now, of course, because of history, but the communists, the nationalists, any of that kind of political thing going on?
I really didn't.
I didn't expect that you would. Yeah.
I think probably the upper echelon obviously knew what was happening, but I had no idea of the situation, and I can't recall that any of my friends did either. We were there marking time before we were going to go home, and trying to keep peace and order. That was basically it.
You also mentioned earlier that this was really a good time for you. This was why was that? What was so special about it?
It was a relief, for one thing. We knew that we weren't going into combat, and we weren't in a situation where we would be faced with combat in the near future. The training was more relaxed, and we had liberty every night. We'd go into town, we'd go to the Y, the men's club, and or to any of the local establishments if you wanted to. And it was just more of a pleasure trip than anything else. Although we had some nasty situations, but generally speaking, it was the relaxation that made us feel that way, I'm sure.
How old were you by this time?
I turned 19 aboard the troop transport on the way to Okinawa. I was 19 years old on March 20th, and we landed on April 1st. Wow. So I was 20 years old.
Wow. You said you were marking time, so there actually was a date that you could set on your calendar saying...
Well, not an exact date, but we knew approximately how much time we had to spend overseas before they would even look at us.
Yeah.
They were going on a point system then, so many points per month, and I knew as to my own situation about where I stood on their calendar, and I knew that following summer I probably would be going home, which I did do.
Was there any communications with home?
I wrote, yes.
Okay.
Right. Just a regular letter. At the time, they had what they called V-mail, which was the condensed, almost like a little fax that you'd write on this form and send it out. But I don't recall getting too much mail over there, and I don't recall that I wrote too much either. Maybe that's the reason I didn't get much.
I found that true in my own life. I don't write, I don't get letters back.
Right,
who figures that out? So when did you find out that you're going home?
I'm not sure of that, Frank, but I'd probably, they gave us notice maybe 2 weeks before we packed up and Got
So it wasn't just you by yourself. This was a group of people.
No, there were
all
probably
going.
men in the same position I
okay.
was.
Okay.
In my outfit, probably a dozen or so men went home the same time I did.
Was there any attempt, as you're packing up and saying goodbye and all that, to exchange addresses and, let's keep in contact after the war?
Yeah, I did that with several of the guys, and it wasn't very successful, very frankly. Part of it was my fault, and part of it was their fault. I recall talking long distance to a couple of guys that one lived in Texas and one lived down in Mississippi, but the distance itself prohibited any extended.
Yeah. Well, the experience I've found, anyways, of your generation was that you all wanted to get back home and get on with your life.
Right, exactly.
Start a family. Yeah. You saved this country, and now you want to live in it.
Yeah, I didn't think so much about saving the country, but I did want to get home and continue my education and get on with my life, and that's what most of us wanted to do. There were very few of us, as I recall, that wanted to be professional soldiers or Marines.
Yeah. So how did you get home?
A transport, a ship that we left China. I think we left in July, and it took us. We were quarantined for a while right there. Someone had scarlet fever, so they didn't move one way or the other. But when we finally got underway, it took us probably a month to get home. I'm getting that confused with my trip home from Korea, which would take place a little later on.
Right.
But the trips become intermingled.
Where did you arrive in America when you found?
San Diego, right. We had been gone. Of course, the war had been over for a year when I got home.
Sure.
In fact, I remember when we came into the harbor there, there's a big sign up there like, "Where have you guys been?" or something like that, which really didn't make us feel good.
But it had to feel good to be back in the States.
God, tremendous. Yeah. First thing we did was we got sent up to Camp Pendleton again, and we went to the PX and got a double chocolate malted milk, and with a quart of milk to go with it, and drank that. It was just great,
As I mentioned before we even got on camera here, that your experience is going to require a second interview because we haven't even gotten to Korea yet, and that's a whole other story in itself. Yeah. But let's wind things up here. You arrived back in the States. Were you discharged?
Yes.
Okay.
They gave us the opportunity of extending our enlistment with the idea of some of us being eligible for officer candidate school or getting a release from active duty. Mm-hmm. And they sent us to Great Lakes, Illinois, and we were released from there.
Okay.
And then I took a train home from Great Lakes to Grand Rapids. Yes, because I recall they were at the train station. My mother and my dad, my sister and my girlfriend were there.
Oh, that must have been an amazing moment.
It really was. I can remember sitting on the train on the way into Grand Rapids, and I had my uniform on with a couple of ribbons, and a man next to me who was a salesman of some sort or something had asked me how long I'd been gone and where I was, and expressed his gratitude to all of us, which I thought was neat. And it was neat to be home. It really was.
So the train pulls up. Did you see them on the platform?
No, they were in the station. That was the old Union Station.
Okay.
That is gone by the way. And I got my sea bag and threw it over my shoulder and walked in, and they were standing there waiting. And it had been 2 years since I'd seen any of them, and it was just unbelievable. I couldn't believe I was home. Yeah. Came home, and they had a little party arranged for me, and so it worked out well.
Yeah. We will go into details of what happened afterwards, but let me ask you one last question for this session, anyways. How do you feel your military experience shaped the person that you are today? I mean, looking back now at that experience, the person that you are today, how did the military experience have anything to do with that?
Well, I can't compare with my experience as being a former military person with someone who hasn't had military experience, but I can tell you that I know that it's increased my my discipline. It's made me more of a quote unquote man, and I think that very frankly, without my military background and with several other factors, that I probably wouldn't have turned out as well as I have. Not that I have any great success or anything, but I've been able to stand on my own 2 feet and married, have a family, and some great kids and grandkids and a wife, and I didn't fall into any bad habits in the service. I could have very easily, but it's been a factor in my entire life, I'm sure.
I found that, I was never in the military, but every interview that I do with a veteran, no matter what period of time that they were in, there is that discipline. And I think with the Marine Corps in particular, it took me years and years for me to develop any kind of discipline.
Yeah.
Whereas you were kind of required to have it very quickly on.
A couple of things that come to mind along those lines. I had occasion to visit an attorney several years ago about a matter, and I had not met the man before, and I walked into his office and sat in front of him, and he started talking about my background and said, "Were you in the military?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You were in the Marines, weren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, how do you know that?" He said, "Just by the way that you're bearing." And we had a session with, as I mentioned before, at the Ford Museum, where we gave a little 10-minute lecture to some people, and they had introduced the speakers as, we've got a soldier here and a pilot and a naval officer and a Marine. And after the session was over, one of the people came up to me and they said, "I knew before he pointed you out that you were the Marine." So I feel good about that.
Yeah. Rod, I want to thank you very much for coming out like this. I know it's been difficult, and we're going to make a real effort to get you in here a second time, because I really want to get into the Korea conflict, and there's so much more to talk about. I thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Right.
Good.